My name is Lisa Black. I'm one of the Rogue Women writers. I will skip all the little details because we are already starting late. And I am the author of 16 novels of forensic suspense, because that is also my day job. I'm a full-time forensic specialist here in Florida. And I'm delighted to be emceeing this event, although my guests may not be as delighted as me. So we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to go around and introduce our 4 authors. And yeah, okay. And then we're going to just briefly, and then we're going to come back to everyone, hopefully hear from some of your new books, and have plenty of time for lots of questions. So we're going to start with Deborah. Although Deborah Crombie's pair of married detectives, Duncan Kincaid and Gemma James, work for Scotland Yard, Deborah grew up outside Dallas, Texas, and still lives there today. But she lived for several years in both Scotland and England, and a trip to Yorkshire cemented the idea for her first Duncan and Gemma mystery. In their 19th outing, A Killing of Innocents, the latest victim claimed by this growing problem of knifings doesn't fit the pattern, but the victim had secrets, and so perhaps do Duncan and Gemma. Now, Deborah's favorite cocktail is the very English Bramble.
Oh, nice.
Which is made with gin, a splash of lemon, and creme de mure, a blackberry liqueur. You can also use Chambord with black raspberries instead of the creme de mure. I have nothing, so I have neither of those, so I had to throw in some red wine to give it the red look. And my first question for Deborah is, I love that you live in a 1905 craftsman home. Are you an HGTV aficionado, or do you groan at the idea of renos?
When I go to the nail salon, that is my huge treat to get to watch HGTV with closed captions, because we have been all streaming for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. So since we're not on cable or satellite, I don't get HGTV. Not that I need to be spending a lot of time sitting around and watching home improvement shows, but I would.
Very fun. And we already have some comments from people about that.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah. And Kathy says, A Killing of Innocents is an amazing read, already on her favorites of all times.
Oh.
And she loves your house. She wants a craftsman really bad. So
she wouldn't want to pay for the upkeep.
I imagine, yeah, that there is a bit of that. So Ed Aymar was born in Panama and now lives where most of his works are set, outside the Washington, D.C. area, where he runs Noir at the Bar event and the monthly Crime Fiction Works newsletter. He also makes his own highly entertaining marketing videos to post on social media, featuring himself and a less than wholly supportive computer-generated AI companion. Outside of writing, his interests are kickball and underground hip-hop groups. In his latest book, No Home for Killers, when jazz musician Marcus is murdered, his 2 sisters aren't particularly surprised. They haven't spoken to him since their mother's funeral themselves, but family is family. The 2 women have to put aside their own differences and their own demons to find the truth. His character, Emily, likes amaretto sours. Nothing fancy, just half and half of sweet sour mix and amaretto, and then fill the rest of the glass with lemon lime soda. So my first question is, why did you make your victim a jazz musician? Not that that's surprising, because you always have music at the Noir and the Bar events, but do you play an instrument?
No, I don't. So I come from a very musical family. My father studied classical piano. My uncle's a jazz pianist. I have to say that right, pianist. And it completely skipped me. I might be able to have some musical ability. I imagine I could probably play the harmonica. It doesn't seem hard. So I think I could probably, I would say, yeah, I'm a decent harmonica player. I haven't played one before, but yeah. And then as far as killing the jazz musician. That wasn't the goal. It's nothing against jazz. It's really more along the line of jazz is such foundational importance to me. When I started really studying writing and wanting to become a professional writer, that's when I really started listening to jazz music. So the two went hand in hand, and I've always wanted to incorporate music into a novel somehow. So, but now that you mention it, yeah, maybe I should have had jazz in a better light than the bad guy's musical choice.
Okay, Carlene O'Connor does not actually live in Ireland, though she spends as much time there as possible. She is mostly Irish, starting with a great grandmother who emigrated in 1897, also dated a ton of Irish guys, and hit all the best Irish pubs while living in New York City. She now lives in California and Chicago. In her 9th book in the Irish Village series, the best bakery in the country is about to be featured on a TV show. And everyone in town is angling to either win or at least get their faces on the screen. But these rivalries turn deadly, so it's up to husband and wife police detectives, Siobhan and McDara, to keep the death rate from raising. Carlene likes to snack on Sargento snack packs featuring pepper jack cheese, peanuts, and raisins, usually paired with a Nespresso. So, have your Irish Village mysteries have been optioned for television? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I will tell you that that happens a lot, you know, that it gets optioned. And as my sister and brother-in-law are both in the screen and television writing business, and they've warned me to lower my expectations because options can go on for a long time. But it's always exciting to have hope that they'll do something with it and take an interest. So the option ran out and then they re-upped it, but they really don't give writers much feedback, so I don't know exactly what stage they're on or what's going on, but it would be fun, of course.
Can you introduce me to your sister? Can you convince her I'm her new best friend?
Of course. She has a lot of best friends.
Yeah, she's going to have a lot more if you hang around writers. Kathy also commented that Ed's No Home for Killers is waiting for her on her table and making loud noises when she passes by. And I'm sorry, Ronnie, sorry, I'm old and I need glasses, say that your Carlene's books would be a fantastic TV series.
Oh, thank you.
Lots of fun. So Sean Doolittle is a Barry and International Thriller Writers award-winning writer of 8 critically acclaimed novels and numerous short stories. He lives in Iowa with his family. In Device-Free Weekend, a tech billionaire invites his 6 best college friends to a weekend getaway on a gorgeous private island to unplug, relax, reacquaint. It's just what any modern person needs. Until day 2, when the 6 wake up to find their host gone, along with any means of communication with the outside world, and only an increasingly dangerous left for them to play. Increasingly dangerous game left for them to play. And their first night on the island, they have a sumptuous dinner of red wine and persimmon tarts. And I didn't make persimmon tarts because I'm not exactly sure what a persimmon is. And but I was happy to discover we have something in common. I also got started in publishing by spending lots of time at the library with Writers Market. And I also played the saxophone in college, though not nearly well enough to get a music scholarship. So you wrote technical manuals for 20 years.
I did,
Please tell me you did not write one for a Sprint flip phone, because that one still astounds me. But tell us, what were the best and worst products to write manuals for?
Oh my gosh. Well, for a long time, I worked for a company that the company processed credit card payments. That was like the purpose of the company. And so the manuals that I wrote were how people in banks can use this giant credit card payment processing system. And I don't know if it's the best or the worst kind of manual that you could write, but I can tell you that I didn't like it. But I did it for a long time.
Wow. I believe you. Okay, so now we're going to go back around and hear a short reading from everyone's new books. And we're going to start with Deborah. And if you can.
I gotta turn
Whoops.
on my really ugly reading light here. My my room is getting dark. I thought about asking if I could just turn on my Audible and let my lovelish British narrator do this, because I hate to read my books with my Texas accent because they don't sound like that in my head. And hopefully they don't sound like this in readers' heads either. But so this is a little excerpt from chapter 1. Mummy. Trevor tugged at the hem of her coat. Leslie Banks gave a sigh of exasperation and kept her eyes fixed on the screen of her mobile. Honestly, Trev, she snapped, amuse yourself for 1 minute, can't you? You're a big boy now. One of our staff at the hotel had just sent her a text saying she couldn't come in for evening shift, and Leslie had got to sort it out straight away. The walk across the square was the only time she didn't have to keep her eye and her hand firmly fixed on her 5-year-old. But Mommy, Trev, just look at the pretty fountain, okay? She said, scrolling through her contacts for someone who might be willing to fill a shift at short notice. Mommy, Trevor's tug was more insistent. Something in his voice made her look away from the screen. Mommy, I think that lady isn't well. What lady is that, love? Trevor pointed. That lady over there by the tree. Leslie made out a dark shape beneath the trees just beyond the illumination cast by the fountain's lights. She shook her head. Not our business, love. But Mommy, Trevor scuffed at the leaves. She walked funny and then she fell down. Look, baby, it's probably someone who's just had a bit too much. Leslie stopped. Why teach your children to be kind if you weren't prepared to be bothered yourself? With a sigh, she pocketed her mobile and grasped Trevor's hand. Okay, let's have a look. Taking a few steps closer, she called out, Miss, are you okay, miss? There was no movement from the shape. Her eyes adjusted and now she could make out legs and the outline of a boot. Leslie hesitated. There was something about that stillness that struck her as wrong. Even drunks weren't usually completely unresponsive. She glanced around, suddenly hoping for a supportive fellow Samaritan, but the crowd had thinned while she'd been dithering. She could call 999, of course, but she'd look an idiot if it were a rough sleeper, merely the worse for wear. And if the woman really was ill, well, she'd had first aid training. You had to these days in the hotel business, didn't you? Loosening Trevor's hand, she put him behind her and said, you stay right there, baby, while Mummy checks on the lady. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the intervening ground and knelt. Miss, she said. When there was no reply, Leslie put tentative fingers on the woman's shoulder and gave it a gentle shake. The figure, loose as a jelly, rolled face up. The flopping arm brushed Leslie's knees. Leslie jerked back, her hand to her mouth. Oh, Christ, she gasped. Behind her, Trevor began to cry. Still there?
Sorry, I was running over trying to share the Facebook live stream to our rogue women writers, but I was listening and that sounds very interesting. I imagine she kind of regretted taking her son over there.
Yeah.
But Americans are so used to shootings that a stabbing sounds pedestrian. But as you know, if you've ever heard Jim Bourne, former FDLE agent, said at a conference, it drives him nuts when people say, oh, well, he only had a knife. It's like a stabbing can be a lot more traumatic because it's up close and it's personal. Is this actually a crime that's been on the upswing in
Yeah, it is.
England?
Knife crime is a huge issue in the UK, and particularly in London. So yeah, this is really a big deal. And you know, you don't worry so much about people carrying guns, kids carrying guns, although it does occasionally happen. but knives are everywhere. So not what we usually think about when we think about London, but it's a big deal.
I was just up half of the night on Friday because we had like a multiple stabbing at this one house, just a group of people, and one person got agitated, and the only thing I could say, but somehow for some reason people are stabbed, they always walk in circles. So we'd like, trails of blood all over, and goes in like a little loop here and a little loop there. It's, my coworker said that's because they're thinking, I've just been stabbed, what do I do?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes in your books, Gemma and Duncan are working on different cases that then come together at the end. And sometimes they're on the same case from the start. So how do you decide which structure to use in each book?
I kind of try to flip-flop a little bit. They haven't been professional partners since back in whichever book they got married in, Where Memories Lie. They haven't been professional partners since they were officially a couple. And that was one of the considerations about doing that. So it just depends on the case and who I think should get a turn. The last book, A Bitter Feast, was fun because it was sort of busman's holiday, and I got to put everybody together working on the same case at the same time. But
cool.
You got to juggle.
Yeah, I would think so. I did want to ask you, and I hope this isn't too controversial, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but are you going to read Prince Harry's book?
That probably is really controversial. I don't know. A friend bought it, and if she passes it on to me, I might. It hasn't been top of my list of things to read. I'm actually, for such an Anglophile, I'm not much of a royal follower. So, and I tend to think they should all just listen to Carolyn Hacks and sort themselves out. The advice columnist. So.
Well, that's interesting. My mother always followed like Queen Elizabeth, and knew all the kids and all the families and everything like that. And when I was a teenager, one time I asked her, like, why do you care? We're not even English. I mean, why do you care about what they're doing? And she said, well, we were pregnant at the same time.
Yeah, everybody has little things. Yeah, things.
She was pregnant with my brother Michael when Elizabeth was pregnant with Charles, and she just kind of identified with her, I guess. So,
yeah.
Well, now we need to hear from Ed, and let's hear part of his new book.
All right, yeah, thanks, Lisa. I'm just going to read about half the beginning of No Home for Killers. Your brother is dead. Everything in Melinda Peña's world disappeared for a moment. The light, chilly rain, the courier delivering dinner to the townhouse across the street in their McLean, Virginia neighborhood, the tightness from her arms crossed over her chest. All she realized were those three stark words from the woman at her door and the painful, fist-like memories of her brother. You mean Marcus? Melinda's voice was strange to her ears, as if it belonged to someone else, someone whispering. Yeah. The stranger's disregard reminded Melinda of her own estrangement from Marcus. The world slowly returned. Melinda recrossed her arms, straightened her posture, fought back the sudden press of tears, and forced out a casual, okay. The woman looked a few years younger than Melinda, probably somewhere in her late 20s, wearing torn jeans and a gray hoodie with a vape pen in her right hand, her left shoved in the hoodie pouch. Strands of wet blonde hair were stuck to her forehead like sloppily drawn S's. She squinted up at the sky. Can I come in? Melinda didn't move. How do you know Marcus? The woman took a drag from her pen, turned the tip blue. Same way women always knew Marcus. Well, I haven't talked to him for years. Regret flickered when Melinda heard her own words, a small moment when she wished she'd been more involved in his life. And then she thought about what Marcus had done to her. The regret passed. The stranger allowed herself a small smile. She took another hit from the pen. You don't know a thing about him, do you? I know enough. Really? Her small smile turned contemptuous. What's that mean? Hell, lady, the stranger said. I just told you your brother is dead. You don't even give a damn. Melinda ignored her, didn't feel the need to go into her family history with some stranger, or return to her past at all. The past was like a dark stairway leading down to a secret room she'd locked long ago. What's your name? Melinda asked, change the subject. Danny, with an I. Is that your real name? Another drag. Danny eyed her. A lot of people give you fake names. The doorknob to that imaginary secret room was rattling. They used to. Danny's real enough. The silence between the women stretched like a rickety wooden bridge. How'd Marcus die? Melinda asked. Someone killed him. That surprise again for Melinda, but this time more abrupt, as if she'd been running and tripped. What? Danny watched her closely. Someone killed him. Who? I don't know. Fear touched Danny's face, widened her eyes. No one does. But I have an idea. That's where I'll stop.
That's an interesting stopping point. That's intriguing.
Well, it's really based on time more than any like real sense I had of like suspense. It was just it was going to be
Work both
mid-word.
ways. Yeah. So you've said that you want your books to be like fast food, something the
Yeah.
readers tear through with great enjoyment but then don't feel so great about themselves afterwards. Like
Yeah.
you want them to be a bit disquieted. And I'm assuming that's because topics you write about should disquiet people.
Yeah, you know, a good friend of mine's always like, don't say they should be, consume like filet mignon or something. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But I really, like I said, I want it to feel like, you just want to gobble it down. You can't stop yourself. And then after you have that disquieting sense of, oh, maybe I shouldn't have had Burger King, like I don't feel too good about myself. But the real important thing is I want you to come back. I want you to still feel like, oh, I really need to get that, so yeah, that really is where that expression came from.
Cool. And you say you're a firm outliner, which personally I totally get. Have you always been that way, or did that technique develop for a reason? Or
no, everything in my life has to be very set and organized. I mean, I'm like one step removed from having to have my pens exactly lined up in, like 2 inches apart from each other. I'm not quite there. I'm very close. So for me, outlining is just kind of a natural thing, and it helps for my books, because if I don't have I don't outline short stories or short fiction, or essays that I write. Because that feels a little freer and a little shorter. But for novels, there's so much that can happen in a novel, and so many changes that can take place, that it really, I need like a map. So I look at an outline more as a map for me to follow. And ideally, as as I'm going, the path gets clearer and the world becomes more and more defined.
So, and your book deals with family, obviously, is the major theme here. And family dynamics can be so incredibly complex. Your other books dealt with like parent-children and then the bonds between spouses. So what made you tackle sibling relationships in this book?
Well, I'm one of 17. No, I'm an only child. I don't have siblings. But I think the sibling role, but because I was an only child, I always wanted siblings. And all my friends who had brothers and sisters were like, God, I would have killed to have been an only child. But I think something about that relationship is so magical to me as someone outside of it. The sort of inherent expected affection I really find intriguing. It's kind of like that, well, what can I do? He's my brother, he's my sister. There's this friendship that is there. And I know that relationship can become estranged and distant and end. But when it doesn't, there's this kind of sort of bemusement that I really admire in siblings. And my wife has she's the middle child of 2 sisters. And I think their relationship is really fascinating, and I draw a lot from it. What I'm saying is basically they just have a terribly dysfunctional relationship. They're not watching this.
You hope.
I hope. It is going to be replayed, you said, so we'll have to see.
I've been dying to attend Noir at the Bar, but unfortunately I live over 1,000 miles away. If I Google Noir at the Bar, a lot of things come up in like other cities at BoucherCon virtual events. So what's going on with Noir at the Bar? How did it get started and when is the next one?
So it started in Philadelphia. I think Pete Rozotsky, who's a critic and a crime fiction enthusiast and blogger, had the idea of just bringing a bunch of crime writers to a bar and they would read there in sort of a back room. And readings can be a very staid sort of affairs, and this loosened it up. Obviously the drinking helped, but also crime fiction helped a lot. The fact that it does, and the fact that it was noir helped a lot too, because then you have an element of humor in there, and it grew from there. It started in Philadelphia and then it went nationally. So I attended one in Baltimore and asked if I could do one in DC, and they were like, there's not like a application or anything, it's fine, whatever you want to do. So I started the DC series in 2014, I think, and I moved them virtually in 2020 because for during the pandemic, and did I think about 13 or 14, one dedicated to every bookstore in the area. We're really fortunate to have a ton of indie bookstores here. So now I do them virtually and in person, and I would love to have you. One of the virtual ones would be great to have you on the roster. Let's talk. My people will get in touch with you, by which I mean I'll send you an email. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, now let's hear from Carlene.
Great.
And what have you selected to read with us?
Yeah, and I'm going to give the same disclaimer as Deborah did. I do not want to butcher the beautiful Irish accent, so I'm going to do it without it. But my narrator, Carolyn Lennon, does a fabulous job if anybody wants to listen to the audiobook. But this is just a little ways into the beginning of Murder in an Irish Bakery, where the town is having a televised bake-off. So bakers have come from all over Ireland. And at the opening, there was a protester who's already disrupted things a bit, anti-sugar protester, who then was carted away in an ambulance after having what seemed like some kind of allergic attack.
Ooh.
The day of B-roll went surprisingly well. The room was filled with sweet smells and sounds of determined bakers. With all the cookers heated up, some contestants seemed to be standing in front of the shared commercial refrigerators just to cool down. Trisha Mayweather in particular seemed to linger in front of one. Is she going through the change of life? Ronan boomed into a microphone, sneaking up behind Trisha and making her jump. She dropped a carton of milk and soon liquid was seeping into the cement floors. Get stuffed, Trisha said, tears coming into her eyes as she swiped a towel from her station and tried to mop it up. No crying over spilled milk, Ronan shouted. Am I right? There was now a line of people waiting impatiently for the fridge. Siobhan nearly felt sorry for Ronan. She wouldn't want to stand between Barry Ryan and a stick of Irish butter. Ronan looked around, but no one would meet his eyes. Apologies, Ronan said. I was trying to insert a little humor into the mix. He finally moved out of the way, allowing Barry access. Fia O'Farrell either felt sorry for Trisha Mayweather or she was calculating the energy bills in her head, for she finally propped open the main door to let in the fresh air and handed Trisha a handheld fan. Thank you, pet, Trisha said. The pair threw an admonishing glance at Ronan O'Keefe. Note to self, Ronan said, never mention the change of life to a woman of a certain age. Make it all women, Martin Murphy said. Better safe than sorry. Don't pay any attention to him, Philomena said. Ronan O'Keefe has been bitter ever since puberty stood him up. It was Ronan's turn to sport a sour face while the others laughed. We need a mop over here, Barry said, lifting his feet as he moved away from the fridge. Sticky. Fia O'Farrell sighed, then enticed a young lad from the crowd to fetch a mop. Siobhan glanced through the open door as a breeze swept in. Every contestant had fun sharing their practice bakes with a crowd, and Siobhan was poised for her turn at a nibble when Garda Vincent Collins stepped into the room. He was just out of Garda College in Templemore, and the handsome young guard had made it clear he wouldn't be in Kilbane for long. He was supposed to be manning the station this week, or at least answering the phones, along with their station clerk, Helen. He caught Siobhan's eye and waved her over. Garda O'Sullivan, he said, straightening his spine as she approached. Siobhan noticed the serious expression on his face. What's the story? He jerked his head to the outside. They stepped underneath the awning. And then, like a light switch had been flipped, rain poured from the skies and the wind lashed at everything in sight. Siobhan closed the bakery doors as a pink umbrella hurtled past them. Garda Collins lunged for it, but missed. They watched as the brelly twisted and bounced across the field until it was a mere pink dot in the distance. What's the story? Siobhan asked, hoping to get an answer before one of them blew away. Cork University Hospital rang. I'm afraid the man who was taken away in ambulance from this site died shortly before arrival.
I hope Ronan's going to get killed.
I won't give anything away.
I'd be happy to help. Okay, so the bakery contest is sort of a return to roots for Siobhan, since before joining the force, she worked with her siblings at the family bistro. Do you like to bake? Did you do a lot of research for this book, either baking or eating or binge watching the Food Network?
I know, I'm kind of surprised I haven't been thrown out of the cozy mystery writing genre because I don't cook or bake. So when they like to have recipes and books, I have to, ask Irish friends who cook or bake. I like to eat. I love to eat baked goods. I had fun watching, the British Bake Off, and there was an Irish version, Irish Bake Show, but I just don't have time to cook or bake. But I admire the people who have that talent.
And I'd probably also kill a sugar protester myself, because I could give up salt before I could give up sugar. That is really not an option.
Yeah, I do have a sweet tooth, that's for sure.
Yeah, me too. The Irish Gardas are a national police force, not a system of local, state, national forces like the United States. So what are the major differences in how things are done? And does that affect your writing? Or?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences. The biggest difference is that, there's not a lot of murders in Ireland, fortunately, especially in the small villages. And so when a murder does happen, you first have to wait for the state pathologist to come and even declare the area a crime scene. So a body can lay there for days because often they're coming from Dublin or, Cork or somewhere, depending where it's found. So that's one thing that was different. And then another thing that's different is that the Gardas, the main Gardas, the detective sergeants will carry a gun, but the Gardas don't carry guns. So they have to be careful in that sense. They'll just have their batons. So those are the two main differences. And I was fortunate that I have been able to talk to guards in Ireland to get some insight. What's funny, the one I talked to, very free with information, but then when I was like, oh, I can put your name in the acknowledgements, he was like, no. Like don't tell anybody we talked, type of thing. So there's still that wall of secrecy too.
So your book's topics have ranged from poker to curses to weddings to orchestras. Do you do a lot of research, or are these just things that you've absorbed during your travels?
Well, yeah, I used to do a lot of research in Irish pubs in New York City, and that was the best type of research. But yeah, I still have a ton of friends in Ireland that I chat with. The current one that I'm working at is Murder on Irish Chipper, and one of my ex-Irish boyfriends, his family used to run a chipper. So, I'm getting lots of lectures on Irish chippers at the moment, especially if I research something that goes against the way they did things. But yeah, I try to do as much research as possible. And I'm really lucky that I do have a slew of Irish friends, mostly that I made in New York City and some that I made in Ireland. And they're always willing to help out and, give suggestions or advice on any particular topic.
Cool. It's always best to have a wide, network of resources.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to move on to Sean Doolittle. And, just from the title of your book, I already have qualms about
does it give you anxiety, device-free weekend? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever, on television or movies or books or anything, whenever somebody convinces a character to give up their cell phone, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, for me, I always find it very difficult to title a book. That's like kind of the last thing that happens for me. I think this is the first book that I've written that the title came first. Just because I like you were just saying, I was seeing, stories about like restaurants that were taking people's cell phones at the door so that they could have a device-free meal, or getaway package where you would, disconnect for a weekend. And it seems like, as much as we're all like reliant on these devices, I was getting the sense that, like me, others have a desire to disconnect as well. And so that title
Mhm.
came pretty readily, the device-free weekend. I'll just read a couple of pages from the beginning.
Great.
I'll tell you what, man, I remember when my kids were 9, and it seems like about 5 minutes ago, and now I gotta go and buy these glasses so that I could read. All right. It hadn't occurred to Stephen Rollins that buying an island was something that anybody, even your old college roommate, could go out and do. Bo and Laney said, sure, why not? It's just real estate. There were websites. Will and Perry claimed to know a couple who'd bought their own ghost town, and those people weren't even all that wealthy. Not Ryan Cloverhill wealthy, certainly. Not cover of Time magazine people, just regular ones. If he was honest, Stephen supposed he'd never quite fully grasped, even after all these years, that Ryan was cover of Time, own your own island people. This was the same Ryan Cloverhill who'd mistakenly filled their apartment dishwasher with regular Dawn and flooded the kitchen with suds. But that was a long time ago. Ryan Cloverhill, their Ryan Cloverhill, golfed with presidents now, and he'd invited them all for Labor Day weekend. Bo and Laney, known internally as Blaney, Will and Perry, known as Will and Perry, Emma, of course, and Stephen, who'd spent the last month gravitating between opposing poles of delight and terror. He loved them all, his oldest and dearest friends, but when had they last spent any real time together in person in the same place, all 7 of them? A decade ago? Closer to 2. Would they survive? It's a fair question, Will said on the phone, but worth the risk. Perry agreed. Get your ass on that plane, Raleigh. The pleasure of your company is cordially required. Blaney, predictably, seemed fixated on the numbers. What did Will and Perry get? A 4 and a 5, Stephen told them. I don't remember who got which. Huh, Bo said. We got 3 and 6. I got 3, Laney joked from the other line. You got 6. They'd been referring to their invitations delivered earlier that week by private courier, heavy linen cardstock, clean Nutriface lettering, the geometric 4-leaf insignia Ryan Cloverhill now used as a personal colophon. On the back of Stevens, in a splash of glitz that didn't quite fit the minimalist design, a large numeral 2 stamped in silver foil. I'm sure it's not a personal ranking, Stephen told them. Bo laughed. Easy for you to say, number 2. Anyway, Laney said, I guess we know who number 1 is. Emma, of course. Stephen never did manage to connect with her somehow. At least not until Denver International a dozen weeks later, when they found themselves hopping the same connecting flight to Seattle. It was Friday morning, 30 minutes before takeoff. Stephen had completed the list of tasks required to leave his entire life and business in Chicago behind for 4 days, which consisted primarily of setting out extra food and water for the cat and locking the door to his apartment. The big weekend had arrived. He saw Emma before she saw him. Stephen waited until she came within earshot, then said, of all the boarding gates in all the airports. Emma Grant looked up, locking immediately on the sound of his voice. She'd been in hustle mode, joining the queue a touch on the late side, fighting with the zipper of her carry-on, with coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. The sudden wattage of her smile hit Stephen with enough force to make his heart stutter. She laughed and headed straight for him, arms outstretched. It looked almost as though she were offering him coffee and an iPhone. Do you really see yourself as the Humphrey Bogart of this airport? Good point. He stepped out of line to meet her, buzzing with adrenaline. He wasn't prepared yet. Ryan probably owns it already. Come here, she said, and they were hugging tightly, awkwardly, all shoulder bags and elbows and handheld accessories. She smelled like Cinnabon and felt just like Emma. Stephen's head swam a little as she planted a fat kiss on his cheek. It's so good to see your face, you asshole. You too, Em. Please don't spill that on me. I should dump it on your head. Let me look at you. Then let me hold something. She handed him the coffee, finished situating her bag, then laid her free palm on his cheek. Shaking her head in wonderment that seemed to border on anthropological, the guy at the counter called the first group onto the plane, and people around them started to move. Stephen Adelaide Rollins. She scratched at his temple. The gray looks good. Bullshit. I look like my dad. I always had a thing for your dad. Same old Emma. You haven't aged a single damn day. Speaking of bullshit. Speaking of Ryan, he said, obviously we have our illustrious host to thank for this meetup. I'm 3C. Where are you? Emma swiped up her boarding pass, grinned, showed him her phone. 3D. Want to switch? I guess we should have known. Ryan had taken care of everybody's travel arrangements, or had an assistant book it more likely, but there must have been specific instructions involved. Leave it all to him, he'd said. You guys just do the getting here. We would have known, Emma noted, if you'd returned any of my calls. I know, you're right, I'm an asshole. Or texts. Sorry, Em. Or emails. Shall we? He said, gesturing toward the first class line, already trundling into the jet bridge. I'll stop there.
Very cool.
Ah.
Well, that sets up a whole lot of stuff in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So is this group of friends based on anyone in particular? Did you think of friends you had back in college and thought, I always thought there was something off about that guy? Or
Not that I always thought there was something off about anybody, but yeah, inevitably, these people, these characters all met each other in college in the early mid 90s, which is when I went to college and met some of my lifelong friends. And so I don't know, I'm getting to an age where you start to look back at, 25 years ago, it used to seem so close, and it still does, but it seems a lot further away from another angle too. And so I was just kind of looking back at that time of my life and the people I knew then and the friends that I made and kept, or made and didn't keep, and inevitably drew from some of those personal experiences. Yeah.
cool. And cell phones, back to cell phones, and the difficulty in giving them up is they've made mysteries difficult. And forced writers to come up with all sorts of reasons why characters can't instantly solve the problem by picking up the phone and dialing 911. Is that kind of what you were saying before about how we can't get separated our phones? Is that what prompted the idea from this book, or did your plot stem from something else in particular?
Well, like I said, the genesis of the book was just this idea of of disconnecting. We live in a very connected world, and sometimes it's nice to disconnect, but it's also difficult, because our whole life is wrapped up in these little things.
Mm-hmm.
The idea came for like I said, the title came first, and it was almost a creative challenge, because I could see a number of different kinds of books that a title like Device Free Weekend could generate. I could see a comedy, or just a straight, reunion story, or a horror novel, or but I supposedly write thrillers. So I decided to make it a thriller. But I remember once, I don't know if folks on this call know the writer Scott Phillips. He wrote a book called The Ice Harvest that was turned into a movie.
Mm-hmm.
The book was set during the 70s, but the movie was set now. And so the plot engine of this book is that people are running around this town during an ice storm, and they can't communicate with each other. Well, when they set the movie in the present, that a lot of the reasons for the plot things to happen wouldn't need to happen, because everybody's got a phone. So I thought the movie did a very clever job of solving that problem by just having somebody slip on the ice and fall on his phone. Broken, and that takes care of that problem. So there, even though we live in a connected world and it complicates our plot sometimes, it's not so hard to get around if you really put your mind to it.
True. Okay. So totally on another one of your books called Burn, I just had a class in processing evidence from arson. So how did you research arsonists when you were writing Burn?
I didn't. Burn. I used in Burn, the whole topic of fire was sort of a metaphor and a backdrop. I had a character that was a retired arsonist, so I didn't have to do any research because he wasn't in that life anymore. But as the book goes along, of course, the past is never past, as they say. But it's set in California during a wildfire season. And so we've got the characters past as an arsonist against the backdrop of natural wildfires in Southern California. And I like the way those two things fit together. So that's why I wrote a book about an arsonist, but I did no research for arson.
Very cool. Well, we still have a little bit of time. So let's do a quick round robin. Plotter or pantser? Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Starting with me?
Yeah, let's start with you.
Oh, I want to be a plotter, but I am a pantser, sad to say. I don't know. I figured out about myself a few years ago that I think for me, writing is more like digging. Like there's something under the ground that I'm trying to find, and I can't really digging it up is what writing is for me. And I can't, it's hard to outline when you don't know the shape of the thing that's under the ground.
Okay. Ed, well, Ed, you've said you were a firm outliner. So.
Yeah, right. I'm actually outlining. I'm taking notes during this meeting as we talk.
So how detailed do you get? Do you do like we were taught in grade school with, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, and then 1, 2, 3, and then lowercase a? And
I moved on to bullet points, but fairly detailed. I will say that the outline allows for change. I always worry that it's going to make it too predictable. You know what's coming, so your writing's not going to lack a bit of surprise. But when you break it down with an outline, then it's not so much you're telling a story where you know the ending, but each chapter has its own sort of heartbeat to it and an identity to it. And I think that helps keep it fresh.
Cool. Carlene?
I'd probably naturally be a pantser, and that's how I wrote my very first novel. But my editor wants to have some kind of rough outline. And for me, when I say outline, it's more synopsis. It's not the Roman numerals like in high school. But I really have found that it does help. And there have been plenty of times I get myself in trouble if I haven't outlined enough, and then I have to kind of stop in the process and do some outlining. So it's like two sides of a coin. So I often flip back and forth. If I'm stuck in one section, I might outline, or sometimes I have to like start free writing to just fill in the outline that's due to the editor. So it's a little bit of both. I'm trying a new method though, based on another author's methods and course I'm taking of even deeper outlines, just to kind of see if that leads to less rewrites and how that feels. I think it can be helpful. And my sister, again, the TV world, like they outline everything, like everything to the T, and it can be beneficial, but it goes kind of against my natural tendencies. So it's a challenge for me.
Okay. And Deborah?
Oh, the grass is always greener. I wish I was a pantser. I have to know the bones of the plot, and I have to know where things are going. I don't always know how we're going to get there, but I do like to have that solution hanging out there in the distance that I know I'm working towards. And I outline scene by scene, kind of running couple of chapters at a time. If you do more than that, it shifts constantly. You think you're going to get a certain amount of information out in a scene, and then the scene needs to break, and then you move it forward to the next scene. And so a couple of chapters at a time.
And one more round robin. What are you working on now? Let's go on to, let's do the same order again. Start with Sean.
I'm working on a book now, another thriller about a brother and a sister who set off on a road trip to scatter their father's ashes. And in the process of this trip, they get wrapped up in a conspiracy theory that complicates their travels.
Fun.
Interesting. Ed, what are you working on now?
Yeah, so my next thriller is coming out in February. It's going to be called When She Left, and it's about a young couple on the run from a crime family, and the story of the reluctant hitman who they hire to chase him, who would rather spend time with his family and work on his collection of Limax Christmas villages.
Different. Okay. I love the title. And Carlene, what's...
I have a second series that just started that's darker. They're also mysteries set in Ireland, but these are not cozies. So I just finished up the second in that series called Some of Us Are Looking. And now I'm flipping back to the Irish village, and I'm working on Murder at an Irish Chipper, which is a fish and chips shop.
I was going to ask. I thought maybe that
Yeah.
had something to do with fish and chips, because, you know, in America, the chipper murder was, I think, Randy Kraft froze his wife and then put her through the wood chipper. So,
A little bit
yeah.
different.
Yeah, very, very, very different. A lot messier. Okay, and Deborah?
I am working on Kincaid James number 20, which doesn't have a title yet. It's driving me crazy not to have a title. And since you asked earlier about how I decided who gets the bulk of the investigation, this book is Gemma's case. I did some setup for how that's going to happen in A Killing of Innocence. And now I'm trying to figure out how it will make sense for Duncan to get involved in this case as well. And it's set in London.
Very cool. Well, I think unfortunately we're out of time. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties earlier with everyone. And thank you so much for bearing up with us and joining us tonight. This has really been a wonderful event. And don't forget everyone else to join us and our author guests. Join us next month on March 13th. We're going to be talking to Kara Black, Brittany Butler, Brendan Dubois, and William Landay. So that's going to be a great event too. And thank you so much. People in the chat are saying
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thank you for hosting.
Thank you.